Hello and welcome to some slightly different content than normal. Today we're going to go over the vlog videos we filmed while we were on our trip to Japan that led us to, of course, go to Wonderfest. Now this is slightly out of order given that Wonderfest actually happened at the end of the trip. Wonderfest happened on a Sunday and we left the next day on Monday. About 2 weeks prior is when we actually came to Japan, and we came to Japan to assist my boss in setting up a new apartment, which you'll see in a later video when we show you the transformation and all the effort it took to get that set up. These videos were originally intended to be released on time as vlogs, but as you'll see, we didn't really have the space to do that, to kind of edit and get kind of comfortable, so I saved it all until now, and I've chosen this format, and I'll just kind of help narrate through all the cool things that we did. This is going to be split into two parts. It's going to cover pretty much all the extra things we did outside of setting the apartment and Wonderfest, which you'll see in this video and in part 2 of this video, as well as a vlog about my background and history with Japan and with this boss I keep referring to. From there too, we also end up filming our top 5 favorite anime figure shops in Akihabara post-COVID, so please stay tuned for that. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Well, for starters, the first day was pretty much a disaster. Our flight left the Atlanta airport at 10 a.m., so we wanted to get there at about 8:30 a.m. We do have TSA pre-check, so we can normally breeze through security. We took a nap the night before because it was so late in the day we didn't think we could stay up that entire time. But by the time we woke up and finished all of our packing, we left the house about 45 minutes late. We were trying to leave at 6:30 and we left later at about 7:15. The real problem here is that this put us in rush hour traffic in Atlanta, and of course there were wrecks along the way. So as we're driving, we're watching our estimated arrival time just slowly creep up and up and up, and it was getting more and more frightening because our arrival time was like 9:30 a.m. The plane would have been gone basically at this point. By the time we got through security, they would have already closed the doors and we would have been left. Thankfully, as we continued to drive, traffic did clear up so we could slowly see it creep down. We did get to the airport with enough time to go through the security comfortably and make it to our gate with about 10 or 15 or so minutes to spare before they started boarding. From there, the flight itself wasn't actually that bad. It's a long 14-hour flight, but it is a one stop, so this is straight from Atlanta Airport to Haneda International Airport in Japan. We got lucky because our seats were in a row of 3, and it just so happened that the plane was not full and our passenger didn't show up, so we had those 3 seats to ourselves. It was one of the only times I've actually gotten good sleep on a plane because we could each lay down and kind of swap shifts, sleeping and staying awake. It was a smooth flight, no issues whatsoever, and eventually we touched down in Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Japan. It was about 45 minutes or so via taxi to central Tokyo. When getting off the plane, we simply had to disembark and go straight to customs. Now, we could not film in customs because phones are not allowed during this process, so here's some video of us simply walking to customs. This was the first time coming to Japan post-lockdown, and I was happy to see that they put in some good measures to have less contact through these lines, and on top of that, really just kind of sped through the process. Almost all of it was digital, and you can do those forms prior to even leaving on your flight. If for some reason you didn't do any of those forms, they did kind of have an area where you either had kiosks where you can input that information, or they'd help you get attached to Wi-Fi and join from there. We had all of our stuff digitally done prior to arriving, so we honestly just breezed through. We just had to open up our app, have like a QR code, they'd scan it, get our passport, and they'd let us right in. To go through baggage claim, once again, they had some kiosks to fill out an online form, and then from there you can proceed through the final claim and get into the country. From there, all we had to do was take a train to Tokyo. Now, we decided to penny pinch basically and take the train versus taking a taxi because we didn't really realize how expensive a taxi would be. Well, all I can say was that it was a terrible choice. We had a ton of suitcases, and going via train made that 45-minute trip via taxi turn into about an hour and 15 minutes just to get to Shinjuku. And hauling those bags was absolutely awful. And on the location we had to go to at first, which was to rendezvous with my boss so she could take us to the apartment we were staying at, she was about a 15-minute walk from the station. So hauling all that, not worth it. We should have simply just gotten a taxi, and we definitely did so on the way back when we went to the airport and then of course left Japan. Now I have no footage of us walking there, and this is where some more disaster kind of strikes. Well, from my boss's apartment to the apartment we were staying at, we took a taxi. And during that, my phone must have fallen out of my sweatpants and I lost it for, well, it's gone. So I do not have that phone, and I'm still feeling the repercussions of that. I have gotten a new phone, but I did lose some data that unfortunately I did not have backed up. But I have the majority of it since I backed up kind of back in December. That being said, it was no fun at all. Thankfully, I had a little iPad mini that became my life-saving tool, and my boss had a kind of prepaid Wi-Fi hotspot she was able to give to me. And so for the most part while I was in Japan, I was okay, but it did make some remote work and things like that quite difficult when trying to authenticate to some of these apps. When we got to the apartment, my boss showed us around and told us that there was no running water, so she already booked us a hotel in Shinjuku for us to stay at. Before going to the hotel, she did treat us to dinner, and she treated us to a meat sushi place. Just like fish, as long as it's fresh, you can eat meat raw. And it was a fun experience. It was very delicious. On top of having, meat nigiri, they even had Wagyu beef. So here's some A5 steaks that she seared up for us. It definitely was kind of a bougie restaurant and had kind of some flair to it. So you can see that she's mixing an oil to kind of finish the seasoning on the steak. It did have some butter and some kind of other sauces in it. You can see she just dipped the spoon into the flame, lit that on fire, and was able to pour that flame over the steak for the final touches. This meal definitely hit the spot. At this time of day, we were super exhausted, especially after walking around and traveling to the apartment. They had a wonderful butter rice dish, and we finished it off with a creme brulee style dish, where it was more of a meringue on top that they had seared. And from there, we ended up going to the hotel, and this honestly was a very nice surprise. If we had gone to the apartment, we would have just been sleeping on a mattress on the floor. We probably would have had to also gone out to buy things like sheets and towels and other amenities. We were able to just go up to the hotel room, shower up, get cleaned off, and then pass out and go straight to bed, which is exactly what we did. Now, in the beginning of this trip, we had a lot of time to ourselves. As I mentioned, and as you'll see in a future video, we were there to actually build and set up this apartment. So what our daily routine looked like was this. We would go to certain shops, like say IKEA, we'd get things ordered, we'd order things from Amazon, talk about what we wanted to do with the apartment. But once we did that, we were just waiting on things to arrive. So we had days where we did nothing but do our own thing. And the next day was one of those days that we had all to ourselves because our boss wanted to meet up the following day after that. So the first thing we wanted to do for sure was to get something we have been craving for years, which is a tall glass of melon soda. Here in America, it's nearly impossible to find good melon soda. In Japan, the best melon soda is straight from the fountain, and it's Fanta melon soda. You can buy it bottled, but it's great over ice, straight from the machine, and it's really hard to find here in America. You basically just have to import it. So this was a wonderful treat, and you can see some extremely large glasses of melon soda. These are by far the largest soda glasses I have seen in Japan. Definitely something they normally reserve for beer. And of course, we got ramen with that. So we got to experience some straight from Tokyo tonkotsu ramen, which is always a delight. For today, we decided what we wanted to do was, well, go immediately into shopping. We wanted to go to Nakano, Broadway, and Akihabara. On our way, we ended up encountering a crane arcade, so of course we had to swing in. Right off the bat, we see a very cool freezer bag that is modeled off of some of our favorite treats in Japan, which are these bamboo shoots or these chocolate mushrooms. As we walk around, you can see all the assortment of prizes, of course, that they have in these arcades. Everything from figures to plushes to even snacks, blankets, clocks, you name it, it's probably in a crane somewhere. Gotta be careful though, it's really easy to spend a ton of money in these places. It definitely plays off, the gambler's fallacy. Most of these machines are, designed for you to win them after a few attempts, and there is skill involved. As long as the crane is set up properly, sometimes you can get things on the first try if you know what you're doing. There are plenty of people that come in here, spend all day just winning items and they go to resell them later. So if there is a prize that you want from these crane machines, and maybe the ones you found just aren't geared to your skill set, or they're just not configured properly to even win them in the first place, you can probably find them in a local shop. And here we begin trying to win this bag that would tease us the rest of the trip. So spoiler alert, we struggled greatly to get this. There was just no good way to grip it after it fell in the beginning. The grip just was not very tight, and everything we did just kept pushing it up to the back of the glass, and we just couldn't get it off. So we were hoping that for the rest of the trip we'd be able to find a location that maybe had it again. We would go to many crane arcades after this looking to find this bag, and unfortunately every place we found it, we also didn't have any success in being able to pick it up, and we didn't see it in any shops. It's something that hopefully I can find online. After that disappointing loss, hopefully Nakano Broadway would be a lot more exciting. For those of you that don't know what Nakano Broadway is, it is essentially a mall that is in Nakano City, Tokyo, that is, majority of it, devoted to anime goods. It's basically a mini Akihabara, but in a mall. I would say about 40% or so of all the stores there are devoted to anime goods. One thing to note is that if you're aware of Mandarake, which is one of the best used kind of anime goods stores in Tokyo, they're headquartered in Nakano Broadway. So when you go in, you'll see a ton of what they call Mandarake special stores, and they're labeled like 1 through 9, and each one of them is devoted to certain things. So one might be for kaiju stuff, one might be for anime figures, doujins, you name it, they probably have a store for it. So that's one of the big draws to Nakano Broadway. If you're visiting Tokyo and you've already explored Akihabara and you want to go somewhere else, definitely put Nakano Broadway on your list. It is the second best place to go for anime goods, period. Anytime we're dealing with Nakano, it's super nostalgic for me because when I was doing things in Japan, which I'll talk about more in a later video, we actually had an apartment here that was about a 5-minute walk from the station. We had that place for about 2.5 years, so almost every day I would go to Nakano Broadway, look around, see what else was new that was coming through. I loved, walking around the city, riding bikes around the city, you name it. Nakano Broadway and Nakano in general really does feel like home for me. I would love to, maybe in the future, if we're able to get a place in Japan, look at Nakano, as well as like Akiba and Ikebukuro. Those places would be great to live as well, but Nakano definitely has a special place in my heart. And right when you walk into Nakano Broadway on the right, you can see the first glimpse of a Mandarake special store. They have a couple of goods that they put in the display over here, but namely they talk about where everything is located and some of the shops you can look forward to. The majority of anime figure stores are on the second floor of this mall. And then third floor is devoted more so to books, but that's not necessarily a true rule. First floor has a lot of grocery stores to it, and even the basement floor of Nakano Broadway is actually a giant grocery store. So many people actually do their shopping there. So the first thing we do is we head up to the second floor, and on the right there, that escalator that goes down to the grocery store, and that escalator you saw on the left actually skips you to the third floor. Right when we step off here, you can see Mandarake Special that is devoted to kaiju stuff. So you can see lots of Godzilla and monster collectibles. And here it is, after 5 years, finally get to go back to this used figure store. On the outside, they put a lot of their most valuable items to kind of catch your attention. And right off the bat, I see one of my Grail figures, which is this Max Factory Asuka from Evangelion 2.0. This was truly my first Grail that I ever had. And if you watched our studio tour, I actually do talk about the backstory of that figure and what it means to me. And it's crazy to see that it's gone up to almost 40,000 yen. As you go in, their displays continue on the left with some of their more high-valued figures. As you walk towards the back, you'll see ones that aren't in a display case. They tend to be cheaper figures or ones that are actually just too large to fit in the display cases. In the middle of the store is where they have some of the smaller kind of anime goods. Some of them are like pins, buttons, and maybe some like gachapon figures that you could win. On the back side, you start to see a lot of their other popular figures. as well as a Nendoroid display. And we noticed while walking through this place that they didn't have any 18 plus figures, which was very disappointing given as that is our favorite thing to collect. Well, right when we stepped outside, it was actually very exciting to see that they have expanded. So right across the way is a store essentially devoted to only R18 figures, or some of these large figures that you can see on the outside and garage kits. And yeah, some very cool stuff, plenty of things of course from Native, Binding, Skytube. But one of the most interesting was actually finding this Tentacle Girl. She is the first Creators Collection figure that they put out, so she was a grail of mine for sure. It does not seem she had the postcard nor the box, so you can see that she's only valued at 20,000 yen. This is one of the only times I've ever seen her in person. When I was hunting her down, the only time I found her, she was without the postcard, and I think it was still listed at about 30,000 yen. After looking for a couple of years for that figure, I had to end up buying her off of Amazon. I could not find her at all other than that one time. So it was very interesting to see her out like that here in these shops. As you walk around, you'll notice that many of these garage door kind of barriers are closed. These are stores that are available for rent. And unfortunately, COVID really took its toll on Nakano Broadway. And you'll see that as we walk around, particularly as we get to the higher floors. We're coming up on Rashinban, which is a great anime goods store, and they do carry a wide selection of anime figures. I believe there are at least 2 of them in Nakano Broadway, though the other one is more devoted to idol group stuff like K-pop things. Generally speaking, Rashinban's prices are very good, although they don't quite compare to something like Mandarake. When you're shopping around for figures in general, I by far recommend writing down the prices of the figures you want and where you saw them. Go around for a day and then come back and buy them at the lowest price that you saw. There's nothing worse than seeing a figure, getting excited, buying it, and then seeing it for 2,000 to 3,000 yen cheaper than what you just paid for. And you can see this is part of the other Rashinban store where they have some of their clearance items, and I think it's also a buyback counter area. Nakano Broadway is very much, like Akiba, so there are a lot of hobby stores. You'll see things like model trains, model cars. You'll see lots of vintage toys, a lot of which, mean a lot to the local Japanese or those that were heavily into earlier Japanese culture, especially when it comes to things like cartoons and shows. A lot of it is lost on us being foreigners and not growing up with things like that. So, of course, we're more interested in anime things. Lots and lots and lots of gachapon stuff everywhere. Many stores and small shops devoted to nothing but gachapon. Over here we start seeing this beautiful display collection of BL works. Almost all of this is boys love or geared towards women. And over here is one of our favorite pieces called Bitch of the Jungle, which is quite amusing. Unfortunately, it was very expensive. So even though it had been a good kind of display piece in the house, 8,000 yen is a little too much just for a kind of discussion piece and kind of a joke. But it's a shame that we could not pick up Bitch of the Jungle. As we progress to the 3rd floor, you can see things do get a little more book oriented. On the outside here, you can just see posters, pieces of art, things that you've really just never seen before, because some of these either never hit, global stores. Some of these are much older and different frame displays of prints that you've never seen, and with the price tag to boot. If you want plushes or anything that you pick up from a crane machine, Nakano Broad and small shops like this are a great place to find those. And if you miss items from Wonderfest and special edition things from Comiket that you can't get, all these used shops, that's what they're best for, but you will pay the price. But you'll see cool things like even, signed stuff from the artist, limited print run items, lots of great display pieces for your house. Fashion is big in Nakano Broad, although it tends to tailor towards suits and such, and particularly high-end watches. Many jewelry shops and watch shops in Nakano Broad. There's a Mandarake special devoted to dolls, so they have Dolphy Dream and Volks dolls. And here's one of the coolest Mandarake special stores, although this is namely devoted to, again, early Japanese kind of pop culture, many of which, didn't mean a lot to us, but mean a lot to the Japanese community. You see a few things, more modern in that mass section there, but for the most part, it's geared towards early, childhood television shows. But this illuminated floor is just a really cool vibe, as you can see. And of course, walking through those gates as you enter and exit this is a great feel. They are quite low, so if you are a tall person, you might hit your head on it. I'm 5'9", and I'd say I'm about maybe 2 inches from hitting it, but I still duck anyways. Here we have a beautiful selection of animation cells. This was something that I was most excited for going back to Nakano Broadway. It's one of the only places where you can find animation cells. It's actually really hard to find these shops. And lately I've been collecting Golden Boy animation cells, and so I was hoping that I could find some for cheap in Japan. Unfortunately, as we move to the top floor, you can really feel COVID and lockdown really kind of hurting this location. Prior to lockdown, not many stores were up here. There were some animation cell stores. Only one survived that was up here on the top floor. And unfortunately, they didn't have any Golden Boy stuff. But this place up top, it's really dead beyond just having Mandarake and then a couple of art showcases. Prior to lockdown, there were a lot of arcades actually, so a lot of the local Japanese population would come up here to participate in tournaments, and there's just a good vibe. Lots of restaurants and such on the top floor, almost all of which are gone and closed down. Hopefully, as tourism has opened up in Japan, we might see some more life come back to places like Nakano Broadway. But as we see in America, shopping malls just don't attract the crowds that they used to. Outside the station, and before you get into that long stretch that leads you to Nakano Broadway, they have this delicious dessert place. These are almost custard-filled pancake type things. I'm not exactly sure what their names are. It's kind of like taiyaki, but without it being fried. I ended up getting a cream custard-filled one, and Kohai got an apple-filled one, and they were quite tasty. I'd actually been dreaming about these because I'd always pick one up on my way into Nakano Broadway when I lived in the area. And you can see at about 160 yen to 200 yen a piece, they're quite affordable and steaming hot. It is rude to eat on the train, so we downed them as quickly as we could and then hopped back over to the Nakano station. I very much enjoy Nakano Station because trains only leave from it in one direction. So we have this brilliant system where you can literally walk from one side of the station to the other, and you just pop up to the left or right to go up to the tracks that you want. And it's just a rapid line way to get you to Chanomizu, where you can do one transfer, and next thing you know, you're in Akihabara. And here it is, after 5 years, we made it to Akiba Station, and you're there when you walk around and start seeing just anime advertised everywhere. It's a wonderful place. It's great to be around somewhere where you see your passions and everything that you enjoy just readily accepted and available. One of the best parts is simply just how vibrant animation is, right? Lots of different colors, and everything, including Akiba itself, is very colorful, very rich. Here we're going to take a left and go to one of the most famous roads in Akiba that's featured in many, many, many anime. This is the road that you'll probably get to because this is the one that leads from the station more direct to the main street and has shopping stores on it. It's featured in a ton of different anime. Aremo is the first that comes to mind for me, of Kirino standing right here and the camera kind of panning around her when she gets excited to make it to Akiba. First store we're going to go to is a newish store that's opened up called the Akihabara Radio Kaikan. This is the replacement for the original radio hall in Akiba, which is at the end of this road on the left, and you'll see it after we leave this location. The radio hall is very famous, and they wanted to update it, so they built this skyscraper that you see here. I actually happened to be in the area on the first weekend of release, so that was a lot of fun to go to. Just absolutely crowded. Everyone really loved it. It's great to see that it survived lockdown. This is a touristy area because it's so close to the station, but it's very much frequented heavily by the local Japanese and very much adored by them, given the legacy that it has. And many shops here, such as Ami, K-Books, Jungle, all exist in this location. Lots and lots of TCG shops as well. So you'll only encounter a few stores that are tourist traps in the sense that their prices are really high, but if you go to the name stores like Ami, K-Books, prices are very normal and competitive with anything that you'll find in the outer Akiba area. K-Books is a wonderful place to look for doujin, and doujin is something that we actually looked forward to the most on this trip. For the most part, we can keep up with anime figures, with the exception of some of the one-offs that are harder to get. We can keep up with pre-orders here and still get them. It's really hard to do the same with Dojin, especially if you just now get into an artist and you want to find their older works. If it's not currently in print, it's really hard to get. So we are very excited to start looking for Dojin works, especially now that over this 5 years that we haven't been to Japan, we developed, a liking to certain artists, and we wanted to get more of them and see what other works that they created that you just can't even find online. Not even when it comes to looking up sites for Dojin themselves. You'll find plenty of things that don't exist there that people haven't scanned in or translated. K-Bucks is also great for anime figure goods and paraphernalia, dakimakuras, all kinds of stuff. They do have a small selection of anime figures in the back. As we go up to the next floor, you get to Ami Ami, which is just an amazing shop. Here at this location, it's mainly all new figures, and most all of their prices reflect what you see on the website. So many of them already have that Ami Ami built-in discount. Very few are at full MSRP. They have this very cool display area where they showcase new figures coming out, as well as some that just recently came out. You can see some of these great 1/4 figures right off the bat of Kon and Killua, as well as some other figures that have already released or are coming out. Always fantastic to see some figures that you've pre-ordered in person. We kind of blitz through these areas, but don't worry. As I mentioned, we're going to have a video where we go through our top 5 favorite stores for anime figure goods, and you'll see some of these more in depth. They have a really beautiful doll store where you have Volks and Dolphy Dream. You can see here this very cute Yor. It was always something I kind of wanted to get into. I still find them a little creepy, but I find the Dolphy Dreams to be far more acceptable and something I do actually appreciate. But I just never quite got into it, given it's a very expensive hobby and they take up a lot of space. Up at the top floor, it's devoted to TCG games. So you'll see lots of Japanese local coming to play together, buy cards, sell cards, all of the above. As we walk out here to the main road, this is a Sunday. And for those that don't know, Sunday is essentially Japan's day off. So the majority of consumers are off on this day. So they do special things like close down the road somewhere from 12 to 6 p.m. I don't quite remember the exact times. As I look up at this building, this was the original radio hall, and unfortunately it has gone out of business. When they first opened, at least the first couple years after they opened the new radio hall, they still kept the old one open, and it was filled top to bottom with anime figure shops still. And it looks like COVID was not good to it, unfortunately. Just take in all the beautiful colors of Akiba. Such a great palette of colors, lots of vibrancy, and it's just so awesome looking up and seeing just anime everywhere. One of the victims of COVID was unfortunately Sega arcades. You can see that they're owned by a company now called Gigo. And not all the locations exist anymore. Actually, around the corner near the radio hall, there's another Sega arcade that went out of business. Even Gigo was not able to save it. As we walk down this main road, the place we were looking for was Ami Ami yet again. Yes, they actually have 2 stores in Akiba, one in the radio hall and one out on the streets. Now this one here is actually where they sell used figures. And I was very pleased to see that they have grown. When they first opened, they had 2 floors, but the second floor was namely for buybacks, and they did kind of operations out of it. But now it's completely expanded to fill 2 floors of used anime goods, and they have the largest R18 figure selection of any store I've ever seen since going to Japan and exploring Akiba. It was very impressive. And unfortunately though, at this time my camera actually died on us, so I do not have any more footage of that. As I mentioned, we are going to do a top 5 best places to buy anime figures, so you will see a lot more to come. And with that, we've actually hit the 30-minute mark for this video, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it here. I was going to include our trip to the Pokemon Center, but I'm going to now move that to part 2. In part 2, we also intend to show you when we meet up with an old college friend of ours and we go to this really beautiful fish art gallery. And after that, my boss takes us on an 11-hour long party where we jump from host club to host club, enjoying the nightlife in Shinjuku. It was quite fun, so stay tuned for that. I really hope you're enjoying this kind of content. I know this is different from what we normally produce. It's fun to share what we've done in Japan. I like seeing what other people enjoy doing there, and hope maybe for those of you that haven't been yet, maybe this is adding some things to your bucket list or getting you excited about going. With that, if you like this kind of content, please subscribe. I'm Senpai. Take care.